hand closes around a shoulder. Not a slap. A slap would almost be a mercy, over in a second, easy to name. This is a grip. Slow, measured. The kind of hold that isn't about pain, it's about ownership. It lands on the shoulder of a 9-year-old boy standing on a marble driveway in Seongbukdong, gold light spilling sideways across the stone from a fountain that costs more than most people's houses. The boy dropped something. A small wooden toy soldier, the kind you're not supposed to bring outside in a suit like his. It hits the pavers. Little clatter. Nothing. The sound a child makes just by being a child. The grip answers that sound. You don't fumble. Not in front of anyone, ever. The boy's name is Minho, 9 years old. His fingers are already closing around that soldier before the sentence finishes, fast, rehearsed. The kind of fast that only comes from a body that has done this correction before, more than once, more than it should ever have to. He doesn't cry. He doesn't even flinch the way most children flinch, the surprised kind, shoulders jumping up toward their ears. He flinches the way a child flinches, when the fear got old a long time ago and stopped bothering to announce itself. His father is the reason. Lee Jin-woo. Slicked dark hair, a jaw you could cut glass on, a tattoo climbing out of his collar like it's trying to escape his own skin. Men speak his name in 3 districts of Seoul the way you'd speak the name of a disease you're hopping not to catch. Everyone on that driveway finds somewhere else to look. A gardener near the hedges, suddenly absorbed in a stem that does not need trimming. A security guard by the gate, studying his own shoes like they've just started talking to him. A driver halfway out of a car, door still open. He simply stops moving. Doesn't retreat, doesn't approach. Just goes still the way people go still around whether they can't outrun. And one woman, maybe 15 feet away, rubber gloves still dripping from the fountain basin she was scrubbing. 3 hours left on a shift that was supposed to be quiet. She doesn't know what Lee Jin-woo's name means in this city. Not really. Not the body count behind it. What she knows is smaller and worse. She's seen that exact flinch before, on a different child, in a different country, and the last time she saw it, she told herself it wasn't her business and walked away. She found out 4 days later what walking away costs. She is not doing that twice. Her feet start moving before her mind finishes deciding anything. It isn't bravery, not the way people usually mean it. It's a debt finally being paid. She crosses the distance and puts herself directly between a 9-year-old boy and a man 3 armed bodyguards answer to, and she looks up into a face that has clearly never once in its adult life expected to be interrupted. Her voice doesn't rise. There's no performance in it at all. Hit your son one more time. I promise you'll pay for it. 5 seconds pass, maybe 6, long enough for one of the bodyguards to shift his weight, hand drifting toward the inside of his jacket, waiting on a signal that hasn't come yet and might never come. Jin-woo doesn't reach for anything. He just looks at her, not with rage, not yet, but with something closer to recalculating. Like a man doing math he never expected to have to do. Then he lifts 2 fingers, barely. The bodyguard's hand stops. Jin-woo steps past her, opens the estate's front door himself, something his staff can't remember him ever doing, and puts his hand, gently this time, unmistakably gently, on his son's back to guide him inside. He looks at her once more before he goes. There's nothing on his face you could put a name to. Then the door closes behind them both. She stands there on the driveway a moment longer than she needs to, gloves still dripping, before she remembers she's supposed to be breathing. If you're already leaning forward wondering what kind of man lets a maid speak to him like that and lives to walk away, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Drop in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight, because this community reaches further than I ever expected it to. And if stories like Heather's, the ones where the quietest person in the room turns out to hold all the power, are the ones that get you, hit like and subscribe now, because this one is just getting started. No one has spoken to Lee Jin-woo that way in years, possibly ever, and lived long enough to talk about it. His men don't know what to do with what they just watched, so they do nothing, which in that world is its own kind of decision. Somewhere behind the estate's tinted windows, a man who has ended other men's lives for far smaller disrespect is sitting alone in his study, replaying 5 seconds on a loop he can't seem to shut off. A woman in a maid's uniform just stopped a kingpin with a single look. But what happens when the mansion gates lock behind her tonight? Her name, for the record no one in that house has bothered to ask yet, is Heather Bayers. New hire. 3 weeks into a job she took because the pay was too good to interrogate too closely. She goes back to her cart, back to the fountain basin, hands shaking just slightly in a way she'd never let anyone see, and finishes her shift like nothing happened at all, because in her mind, something like this happening once before is exactly why she can't afford to make it a habit of being noticed. But she has been noticed. That's the problem. Somewhere upstairs, behind a door no member of staff is allowed near, Jinwoo is staring at a folder his head of security just handed him. Heather's entire background file, assembled in under an hour, the way you'd assemble a threat assessment on anyone who just humiliated him in front of his own men. Minho's trembling stopped the moment her shadow fell over him, and that is the most dangerous thing that could have happened to either of them. Because in this house, safety has never once come without a cost attached, and somebody is about to be asked to pay for it. The Seoul docks at midnight don't sleep so much as they wait. Shipping containers stacked for high-cast shadows long enough to hide a body, and tonight one of them is being used for exactly that purpose, not a killing, just a conversation Jinwoo doesn't want witnessed. A man kneels on wet concrete, wrists bound, sweat cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. He runs cargo through this port for Jinwoo's syndicate and made the mistake of skimming a percentage he thought no one would notice. Jinwoo crouches to his eye level, unhurried, like he has all night because he does. "You didn't steal from me," he says quietly. "You stole from every family this port keeps fed. I'm going to let you keep both hands. That's the last mercy you get from me." No shouting, no theater, just a decision delivered the way other men deliver weather reports. 2 of his men haul the kneeling man up and walk him toward the water's edge, not to drown him, only to make sure the lesson has a view he'll remember. This is who runs 3 districts of Seoul, a man who trades in consequences the way other people trade in currency. Across the city, in a one-room apartment above a noodle shop in Itaewon, Heather Bayers is doing arithmetic by lamplight. Her ledger is a physical notebook, not an app. She doesn't trust anything she can't hold. Rent, subtracted. Groceries, subtracted, itemized down to the one. What's left goes into an envelope she'll carry to a wire transfer counter every single Friday without exception, rain or shift change or exhaustion, sent to an address on the other side of an ocean she hasn't crossed back over in years. She sends money to the same account every Friday, but it isn't a bank, it's an apology. There's no photograph on her wall of the sister that money is meant for. She keeps nothing that could remind her, because reminding is a luxury she decided a long time ago she doesn't get to have. What she has instead is a system: wake at 5, iron her uniform the night before so mornings stay simple, never owe anyone a single one she can't repay by the following Friday. Discipline isn't a personality trait for her. It's scaffolding holding up a life she nearly lost the right to keep. She was a nursing assistant once, before the money ran out for the certification she needed to finish. She left that dream folded up somewhere she doesn't unfold often, boarded a plane, and became someone who cleans other people's homes so someone back home never has to depend on a guardian who couldn't be trusted the way Heather once trusted him. The debt she's paying isn't written on any ledger. It's the kind that doesn't have an end date. By morning, 2 floors above the room where Minho sleeps, Jinwoo sits at his desk with Heather's file open in front of him for the first time. His head of security stands across from him, arms folded, waiting for instructions that would normally take 30 seconds to give. They don't come. Jinwoo turns pages that should tell him everything he needs: family, finances, associations, weaknesses. Instead, he finds a woman with no property to seize, no relatives in Seoul to threaten, no debts owed to anyone who answers to him, no secret he could dangle over her to buy her silence. Every page is smaller than the one before it. Fewer levers, fewer angles. In a city built on leverage, Heather Bayers had none. How do you threaten a woman who has already lost everything? She's clean, his head of security says, like it's a problem rather than a fact. No family here, no money worth mentioning. Send her back to the agency, tell them we need someone else. It's one phone call. Jinwoo doesn't answer right away. His finger stops on a line item, a wire transfer, same amount, same day, every single week for 3 years without a gap. Not a single missed Friday, not even the week the file notes she was hospitalized for exhaustion. Jinwoo's men wanted her gone, but Jinwoo was busy studying a ledger of a life he couldn't control. That's what unsettles him more than the pointed glove ever did. He runs an empire built on men who can be bought, bent, or broken, and here is a woman with nothing left for him to take who still found a way to stand her ground on his own driveway like she had everything to lose. It doesn't compute. In his world, fearlessness is supposed to come from power. Hers comes from somewhere he doesn't have a name for yet. Leave her, he says finally. His head of security doesn't hide his surprise. She threatened you in front of your own men. I know what she did. Jinwoo closes the folder, slower than he opened it. I want to know why she wasn't afraid to. That answer isn't good enough for the room, and both men know it, but no one pushes further. Not with him. Downstairs, Min-ho sits at breakfast alone, same as every morning, pushing rice around a bowl he has no appetite for. He doesn't know yet that the woman who stepped between him and his father yesterday is still employed. He only knows that last night was the first night in longer than he can count that he fell asleep without listening for footsteps in the hallway. Heather arrives for her shift at 7 sharp, uniform ironed, expressions arranged into the same careful neutrality she wears into every room in this house. The neutrality of someone who has learned that being noticed is a risk, not a compliment. She has no idea a folder with her entire life. Inside it sat open on a desk 2 floors above her for most of the night. No idea that the man she confronted has decided, for reasons even he can't fully explain, that she isn't a problem to be removed. What she does know, the moment she steps through the servants' entrance and feels the entire staff go quiet at the sight of her, is that something about yesterday has already changed the temperature of this house. And in a home like this one, a change in temperature is never something that happens by accident. The summons comes at 10 in the morning, delivered by a housekeeper who won't meet Heather's eyes when she says it. Mr. Lee wants you in his study. Now. Heather sets down the cloth she's using on the banister and follows, running through every possible reason a man like that might want a maid alone in a room with him, none of them comforting. His study is nothing like she pictured. No trophies of violence, no obvious wealth on display, just dark wood, a single window overlooking the garden, and Jinwoo standing at it with his back to the door when she enters. Sit, he says, not turning around. She doesn't. I'd rather stand. That earns her the first real look he's given her since the driveway, a flicker of something almost like amusement, gone before it settles into anything readable. He turns, gestures to a folder already sitting closed on his desk, though she has no way of knowing it holds her entire life reduced to numbers. I'm reassigning you, he says. Min-ho needs a full-time caretaker, someone who stays with him meals, mornings, the hours his tutors don't cover. You'd move into staff quarters on the estate. The salary would be 4 times what you're currently earning. He names a figure. It's not an exaggeration. It's the kind of number that could clear every debt she's carrying and still leave room to send home more than she's ever managed to send in a single year. She doesn't move toward the desk, doesn't ask to see the number in writing. No, she says. He offered her a fortune, but she didn't look at the check. She looked past him entirely, like the money was the least interesting object in the room. You threatened me on my own property 2 days ago, Jinwoo says, an edge finally showing under the calm, and now I'm offering you a promotion most people in this house would trade a limb for. Explain the refusal. Because I don't know what you actually want from me, she says. Men who need something usually dress it up as generosity first. I've seen that play before. I'm not interested in a second run of it. Something in his jaw tightens, not anger exactly, closer to being caught. He doesn't deny it outright, which tells her more than a denial would have. There's no arrangement here beyond what I said, he answers. My son needs someone who isn't afraid of me. As of 2 days ago, that's apparently a very short list. She almost leaves it there. Almost turns and walks back to her cart and her ledger and her Fridays, the life she built specifically so no one could ever again put her in a position to need anyone. Then she sees him. Through the study's half-open door, down the hallway, Minho is pressed into the narrow gap behind a marble pillar, small enough that most adults would walk right past without noticing, dressed in a suit too formal for a Tuesday morning, watching the doorway with the stillness of a child who has learned that being seen is dangerous. He isn't playing. He isn't waiting for anyone. He's simply disappearing as thoroughly as a 9-year-old can manage inside his own home. Something in Heather's chest reorganizes itself. She's seen that exact posture before, in a much smaller apartment, on a much smaller sister, years before she learned that noticing isn't the same as saving someone, and that the gap between those two things is the one she's spent every year since trying to close. "I'll take the position," she says before she's fully decided to say it, "but I have terms." Jinwoo's eyebrows lift a fraction. "You're negotiating." "I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference, and you're about to find out which one you're getting." She turns fully to face him now, all the earlier hesitation gone. "During my hours with him, you don't come into the nursery. Not to check on us, not to observe, not for any reason. If you have something to say to your son, you say it somewhere else on your own time. My hours are his, not yours." She gave a mafia boss terms. And to his bodyguard's horror, standing silent by the door, Jinwoo nodded. It's such a small motion, a single dip of the chin, but the bodyguard's expression cracks for half a second, the practiced blankness of a decade of service momentarily unable to hide his disbelief. No one gives Lee Jinwoo conditions. No one has, not once, not in the 15 years he's held this house together through fear alone. "Agreed," Jinwoo says. Heather doesn't thank him, doesn't smile. She simply nods once, the exact same gesture he just gave her, and turns to leave the study before he can add anything that might make her reconsider. She walked into the lion's den willingly, but she brought her own rules, and somewhere behind her, a man used to being the only one in any room who sets terms is left standing at his window, recalculating a second time in 3 days. Heather is stepping directly into a world where one wrong move could cost her life. Drop a heel in the comments right now if you believe she has the strength to change this broken family. That afternoon, she finds Minho exactly where she saw him from the study doorway, same pillar, same stillness, as if he never moved at all. She doesn't crouch down to his level the way most adults do when they want something from a child. She simply sits on the floor beside him, back against the marble, and says nothing. Minutes pass. He doesn't run. Doesn't speak either, but he doesn't run. Upstairs, Jinwoo watches the two of them on a security monitor he has no professional reason to be checking. His second-in-command, Jin Kyu, standing silently behind him, saying nothing about what either of them clearly already understands. Something has shifted in this house that no amount of money or fear can undo now. And somewhere in Seongbukdong, word is already beginning to travel through channels Jinwoo doesn't control, that the mafia boss who once ended a man's career over a stolen shipment let a maid set the terms of his own household. And that kind of story, once it starts moving through the wrong ears, has a way of becoming a weakness someone will eventually decide to test. The nursery wing of the Seongbukdong estate was designed by someone who understood acoustics better than they understood children. Marble floors, high ceilings, a hallway long enough that footsteps announce themselves 3 rooms early. It was built for grandeur. What it accidentally became was a machine for amplifying every silence a lonely child could produce. Heather notices this on her first full morning in the position. How the quiet in this house isn't peaceful, it's watchful, the kind of silence that trains a person to disappear inside it rather than disturb it. She decides within the hour that this is the first thing she's going to change, even if she has no idea yet how. She starts small. A breakfast tray, but not the kind the kitchen usually sends up, rice porridge with a swirl of egg through it, the way she used to make it for someone much smaller than Minho, a long time ago and half a world away. She sets it in front of him without ceremony, no instructions, no expectant hovering. He stares at it longer than he eats it. Days pass before he finishes a full bowl. Minho ate every bite of food she made. For a child who hadn't smiled in years, this was a revolution nobody in that house was equipped to notice except her. She doesn't ask him questions he can't answer, doesn't fill silences with the nervous chatter most adults use to manage their own discomfort. Instead, she sits on the floor beside him during his quiet hours, back against the same wall, close enough to be present without being demanding. Some afternoons she reads. Some afternoons she does nothing at all, just breathes in the same room as him until his shoulders drop half an inch, which for Minho counts as an entire conversation. The mansion was built to amplify silence, but Heather was teaching the boy how to speak without saying a word. A hand offered instead of a question asked, a bowl refilled without comment, a presence that didn't flinch when he flinched. 2 floors up, in a room with a bank of monitors most staff don't know exists, Jinwoo watches. He tells himself it's diligence. A father checking on his son's new caretaker, verifying she's suited to the role, nothing more calculated than that. He runs this justification through his mind so many times over the course of a week that it starts to feel less like a reason and more like an excuse wearing a reason's clothes. What the cameras actually show him is smaller and harder to defend against than any threat his security team could name. A woman sitting cross-legged on marble, patient in a way he doesn't have a name for, coaxing warmth out of a boy Jinwoo has spent years teaching to survive without needing any. Jinwoo watched the monitors for hours, looking for a threat, but all he found was his own shame, replayed in high definition from 4 different angles. He remembers, without wanting to, a version of himself that used to sit on floors too. Before the docs, before the tattoos, before every soft thing about him got filed away as a liability. There was a version of Lee Jinwoo who once made his own son laugh, before grief rewired every instinct he had into something colder and more useful for staying alive in his world. He doesn't recognize himself in the footage. He recognizes the boy instead, and that's worse. Jin Kaiyu finds him there most evenings, monitors glowing, expression unreadable in the dark. "You could go down there," Jin Kaiyu says once, careful with the offer, the way you'd hand someone something breakable. No one would question it. He doesn't need me interrupting whatever this is. That's not what I asked. Jinwoo doesn't answer that. Jin Kaiyu, who has worked for this family long enough to know which silences to leave alone, lets it go. Downstairs, Heather has no idea she's being watched at all, and it wouldn't change what she's doing if she knew. She isn't performing patience for anyone's benefit. She's doing what she's always done in rooms full of hurt people who have stopped trusting kindness. She shows up the same way, every day, until the showing up itself becomes the proof. By the end of the first week, small things start happening that the household staff notice and whisper about in the kitchen. Minho starts leaving his bedroom door open at night instead of locked. He picks up a pencil one afternoon and draws something Heather doesn't ask to see, just lets him keep it private, and he doesn't crumple it the way he usually crumples anything he makes. He still doesn't speak. Not one word, not to her, not to anyone. But something underneath the silence has started to loosen, the way ice loosens before it actually breaks, a change you feel more than you see. Jinwoo notices it too. In glimpses, he isn't proud of gathering secondhand through a camera feed, instead of firsthand at a dinner table where he still hasn't sat down with his son in longer than either of them would admit. He tells himself there's time to fix that later. He's told himself that before. One evening, unable to stop himself, he leaves the monitor room and walks the long hallway toward the nursery wing himself. The first time he's approached that part of the house since agreeing to her terms. He stops at the exact pillar where Minho used to hide, close enough to hear voices through the half-open door. Heather's voice, low, telling some story that isn't really a story, more a string of gentle nonsense meant to fill a quiet room without demanding a response. And underneath it, barely audible, something Jinwoo hasn't heard from his son in over a year. A laugh, small, interrupted almost as soon as it starts, like the boy caught himself doing something forbidden, but real. Jinwoo stands frozen in that hallway, hand against the cool marble, feeling something crack open in his chest that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with how long it's been since he earned a sound like that from his own child. He doesn't go in. He agreed he wouldn't, and some part of him understands, even now, that walking through that door tonight would undo whatever fragile thing is being built on the other side of it. Instead, he turns and walks back the way he came, past the pillar, past the silence that no longer feels the same as it did a week ago. But somewhere on the estate grounds that same evening, a car idles outside the gate longer than any delivery or service vehicle should. No one on staff recognizes the plates. By the time security is alerted to check, the car is gone, leaving behind nothing but tire marks on gravel and the uneasy certainty that someone outside these walls has just confirmed exactly which window belongs to the nursery. The east wing of the estate has its own kind of silence, heavier than the rest of the house, dust-thick, the silence of a room that hasn't been asked to hold sound in years. Heather learns about it by accident, following a housekeeper's offhand mention that the far hallway hasn't been cleaned since before Minho was old enough to remember why. "Nobody goes in there," the woman says, already regretting she brought it up. It was hers, the wife's study. Mr. Lee had it locked after the accident and never had it opened again. Heather isn't the type to leave dust where dust doesn't belong, and something about a sealed door in a house full of grief pulls at the part of her that has spent years trying to fix what other people leave broken. She finds the spare key in the housekeeping ledger, unused, still labeled in careful handwriting that predates her employment by years. The door sticks before it gives. Inside, everything sits exactly where it was left, a shawl draped over a reading chair, a cup with a dried ring at the bottom, a room paused mid-breath the day its owner never came home. Heather moves through it slowly, cloth in hand, more reverent than efficient, wiping down surfaces like she's tending a grave rather than a study. It's the desk that stops her. A drawer that doesn't open easily, warped from years of humidity, and behind it, wedged into a gap between the wood and the frame, a leather notebook that clearly wasn't meant to be found by anyone dusting for cobwebs. She shouldn't open it. She knows that even as her fingers are already working the cover loose. The handwriting inside is elegant, urgent in places, slanting harder on certain pages like the pen pressed down with whatever the writer was feeling in that moment. Heather doesn't read Korean fluently, but enough phrases repeat, enough dates align with things she's overheard in passing from staff who still whisper about the accident years later. That she doesn't need a full translation to understand the shape of what she's holding. The late wife's ghost wasn't in the air. She was in the pages of a notebook Heather was holding, describing fear in her own house long before the crash that was supposed to have been random. One entry, dated weeks before the accident, names no one directly, but describes someone close to the family passing information to people who wanted Jinwoo's territory. Someone trusted enough to know the wife's driving schedule, someone who never should have had reason to share it. Heather's hands go cold around the notebook. She unlocked a room she shouldn't have, and found a secret that could burn soul to the ground, and she understands with sudden, sick clarity that whatever this house has been telling itself about that accident for years might be a story built entirely on a lie. She doesn't hear the door behind her until it's already open. "What are you doing here?" It isn't a question. Jinwoo's voice has none of the calculation she's used to hearing from him. This is something rawer, unguarded, a man caught in a room he spent years pretending doesn't exist. His eyes go from her face to the notebook in her hands, and whatever color was left in his expression drains out of it entirely. "I was cleaning," she says, which is true and useless in equal measure. "I found this in the drawer. Jinwoo, it says." "Put it down." "You need to see what's written in." I said put it down. He crosses the room faster than she expects for a man usually so controlled, and his hand closes around her wrist, not violently, but with a grip that carries years of something he's never once let another person witness. His skin is cold. His eyes are not calm at all. They're terrified, in a way she's never seen, not even on the driveway when 3 armed men waited on his signal. Jinwoo's hand on her wrist was cold, but his eyes were terrified of what she had discovered, and for a moment neither of them moved, the notebook caught between them like evidence neither one wants to be the one holding. "You don't know what you're touching," he says, low, almost a warning to himself as much as to her. "This room isn't yours to open." "Someone set up the accident," Heather says anyway, because she's never once in her life managed to stay quiet about something that mattered. It's in her handwriting. She knew before it happened that someone close to you was. "Stop." The word cracks through the room like something breaking. He releases her wrist, but he doesn't step back. His breathing is uneven now, controls slipping in a way she's never witnessed from him, not once, not even under threat. "She's dead," he says, quieter, and somehow that's worse than the shouting would have been. "She's been dead for 4 years. I have spent every one of those years believing it was random. Bad luck. A road, a storm, nothing anyone could have prevented." His eyes drop to the notebook again, and something in his face fractures further. "If you're telling me it wasn't random, you're telling me someone in this house let her die, and I've been shaking that person's hand every day since." Heather doesn't have an answer for that. There isn't one that would make this room any less devastating for either of them. "I need to know who," she says instead, gentler now. "So do you." He takes the notebook from her hands, careful in a way that contradicts everything about how he grabbed her wrist a moment ago, and holds it like it might disintegrate. "Tell no one what you found in here," he says. "Not staff, not Minho, no one." "Jinwoo. Promise me." She promises, because there's nothing else to do in that moment. But even as the word leaves her mouth, she understands she's just been pulled into something far larger than a nursery and a grieving boy. Something with roots in this house that reach back years, and someone still walking these halls who has a very good reason to make sure that notebook never surfaces again. She has just unlocked a secret that could get her killed by Jinwoo's own men. If you are rooting for Heather to survive the shadows of this mansion, hit that like button right now to show your support. That night, long after the estate has gone dark, Heather lies awake replaying every face she's passed in these hallways over the past weeks. Every guard, every driver, every quiet member of staff who has access to schedules and routes, and the private movements of the family they serve. Somewhere among them is someone who has been living inside this house for 4 years, trusted completely, while carrying a secret capable of ending everything Jinwoo has spent that same time rebuilding. And whoever that person is, they now have every reason in the world to notice that a maid with a yellow rubber glove has started asking questions she was never supposed to be able to ask. 2 days pass before either of them mentions the study again. Heather goes through her routine with Minho exactly as before: meals, quiet hours, the careful architecture of comfort she's been building brick by brick. But something in the house has shifted, a tension humming just under the surface of every hallway she walks. She finds Jinwoo on the 3rd evening, alone on the estate's rear terrace, a glass in his hand he hasn't touched since he poured it. He doesn't send her away when she steps out, which is its own kind of invitation. "You haven't asked me anything since the study," he says, without turning. "You told me not to." "That's never stopped you before." It's the closest thing to a joke she's heard from him, dry and worn at the edges, and something in it loosens the careful distance she's kept since that afternoon. She sits, uninvited, in the chair across from him, and for a while neither of them says anything at all. "I had a sister," she says eventually, watching the garden instead of his face, because some truths are easier spoken sideways. "Younger than me by 6 years. Our mother worked 2 jobs and our stepfather filled in the hours she wasn't home. I knew what he was. I saw the bruises before my sister ever tried to hide them from me." Jinwoo goes still in the way he does when he's actually listening, not performing patience the way most people do while waiting for their turn to speak. "I left anyway," Heather continues. "Took a nursing assistant program overseas because it was the only way out I could see, told myself I'd send money back. That money would fix what I couldn't stay to fix myself. My sister was 12 when I left her in that house." "What happened to her?" "She's alive," Heather says, and the relief in her own voice still surprises her every time she says it out loud. "She got out eventually, on her own, no thanks to me. But I've spent every year since trying to make up for the years I wasn't there. Every Friday, every wire transfer, it's not generosity, it's penance. She told him about a grave in her heart, one she's been tending quietly for over a decade. And for the first time since the accident, his own scars didn't feel so heavy sitting across from hers. Jinwoo is quiet for a long moment, turning the untouched glass slowly on the armrest. I make Minho hard, he says finally, because the world he was born into eats softness for breakfast. Every rival I have is watching for exactly one thing, a crack, a weakness, someone worth threatening to get to me. My wife was gentle. My wife was warm with everyone she met, and I loved that about her more than anything, and it's possible that same warmth is what made her an easy target for someone who wanted to hurt me and didn't have the nerve to come at me directly. So you decided the answer was teaching your son not to feel anything at all. I decided the answer was teaching him to survive. His voice cracks slightly on the last word, the first real fracture she's heard from him. I don't know how to do both. I never learned how. The kingpin of Seoul was learning how to listen to a woman who had nothing but her words. No leverage, no threat behind them, just the simple weight of someone telling the truth about her own failures instead of pretending she'd never had any. Toughness and love aren't opposites, Heather says. You've just never seen anyone hold both at the same time. That doesn't mean it can't be done. It means you grew up around people who never showed you how. Jinwoo doesn't answer that directly. He looks toward the house instead, toward the lit window of the nursery 2 floors up, where Minho's shadow moves faintly behind the curtain, still awake past when he should be. Neither of them says anything else that night, but something has been agreed to in the silence between them, the kind of understanding that doesn't need spoken terms the way her employment did. The following morning, Heather is setting breakfast in front of Minho when she hears footsteps in the hallway that don't belong to any of the household staff. Heavier, unhurried, familiar in a way that makes her pause with the spoon still in her hand. Jinwoo appears in the doorway of the nursery for the first time since she set her boundary weeks ago. He doesn't cross the threshold uninvited. He simply stands there, waiting, the way a man waits when he's finally decided he's allowed to ask. May I join you both, he says. It isn't a demand. It's the first genuine question she's heard him ask anyone in this house. Heather glances at Minho, who has gone very still, spoon frozen halfway to his mouth, watching his father the way you'd watch whether that might turn either direction. That's his decision to make, Heather says, not mine. Minho doesn't speak. He never speaks, but he slides over on the bench just slightly, just enough to leave room. He didn't walk away this time. He sat down at his own kitchen table, across from his son, in a room he'd spent years only watching through a camera feed 2 floors above. Breakfast that morning is quiet, the same kind of quiet Heather has spent weeks teaching Minho how to fill without words. But it's a different silence now, one with 3 people inside it instead of 2, and for the first time since Heather arrived at this estate, she watches Minho glance up at his father without flinching. Heather is finally letting down her walls. Let me know in the comments, who was the one person in your life who stood up for you when you couldn't stand for yourself? I read and reply to every single one. Later that day, while Jinwoo is occupied in a meeting he can't reschedule, Jin Kaiyu finds a reason to linger near the nursery wing longer than his duties require, watching the door with an expression no one on staff has learned to read yet. He knows what's written in the notebook Jinwoo has kept locked in his desk since the study. He's known for 4 years, carrying a silence heavier than any secret Heather has stumbled onto. And watching this fragile new piece take root in the house he's sworn to protect, he understands, more clearly than ever, that the truth he's been sitting on has a very short window left before someone else finds it first. Word travels through Seoul's underworld the way smoke moves through a closed room, slow at first, then suddenly everywhere. It reaches Hanyol on a Tuesday, delivered by a man he pays to know things before anyone else does. The maid, the man says. The one who stopped him on his own driveway. She's living at the estate now, running his son's household. He listens to her. Hanyol sits with that information longer than he needs to. He remembers a version of Jinwoo from before either of them wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. 2 boys from the same Incheon slum. splitting whatever food they could find, promising each other they'd never end up like the men who ran that neighborhood. He remembers exactly the moment Junwoo decided to legitimize half his operations and left him behind to run the parts too dirty for a man building a respectable empire. Abandonment leaves a specific kind of scar. Hanyol has spent years learning how to use his. Find her weak points, he says. I don't want her dead, I want her gone. A dead maid makes headlines. A frightened one just disappears and he'll never know it was me. The campaign starts small enough that Heather almost convinces herself she's imagining it. Her bicycle, chained outside her old Idiwan building on a rare visit to collect the last of her things, has both tires slashed clean through by the time she comes back down. No note, no message, just damage precise enough to feel deliberate rather than random. Hanyol thought a few broken windows would make her run. He didn't know the steel she was made of, forged years before he ever learned her name, in a house on the other side of an ocean, where she'd already survived worse than slashed tires. She doesn't mention it to anyone. Tells herself it was a stranger, bad luck, the ordinary cruelty of a city she doesn't fully belong to yet. Then it happens again, differently. A man follows her for 4 blocks on her walk back from the market, close enough that she can feel him without turning around, far enough that she can never quite catch a face worth remembering. He peels off the moment she steps into a crowded subway entrance, vanishing the way smoke vanishes when you finally turn to look at it directly. She keeps walking, doesn't run, refuses to give whoever is watching the satisfaction of a reaction they can report back. At the estate that evening, she serves dinner to Minho with hands so steady no one would guess what happened 3 hours earlier. Junwoo, sitting across the table now as a regular habit these past weeks, notices something anyway, not the fear itself, but the effort it's taking her to hide it. You're quiet tonight, he says. Long day, she answers, which isn't a lie, just an incomplete truth. She kept the secrets to protect the boy, but the shadows were getting closer every night, and telling Junwoo what she suspects would mean admitting a war might already be circling this house. A war she has no proof yet belongs to anyone specific, and one that could cost lives the moment his retaliation begins. The third incident is the one that finally makes it impossible to explain away as coincidence. She returns to the small studio she still keeps in Idiwan, mostly empty now, mostly just a place to store what she hasn't yet moved to the estate, and finds her door unlocked when she's certain she locked it that morning. Nothing inside is stolen. Nothing is even obviously disturbed. But a single item has been moved, a photograph she keeps of her sister, taken off the shelf and set squarely in the center of her bed, facing up, like a message written in the one language guaranteed to reach her. Her hands shake for the first time since the driveway. Whoever did this knows about her sister, knows about the ocean between them, the guilt she's spent a decade trying to outrun, the exact wound that would hurt worst if pressed. This isn't random harassment anymore. This is someone who has studied her the way Junwoo's security file once tried to and failed to find anything useful, except this time, someone found the one thing that actually works. A war was coming to the estate, and the maid was standing on the front line without a single weapon beyond her own refusal to break. She doesn't call the police, doesn't call Junwoo, sits on the edge of that bed for a long time with her sister's photograph in her hands, running through every version of what happens if she tells him the truth, the guards doubling, the retaliation he'd almost certainly launch against whoever he suspected, the possibility that Minho would lose the fragile new peace at his own breakfast table because his caretaker couldn't handle a few threats alone. She decides, the way she's decided everything important in her life, without asking anyone's permission first. She'll handle this herself. She always has. The next morning she's back at the estate before 6, uniform pressed, expression arranged into its usual careful neutrality, serving breakfast like nothing at all happened the night before. Minho notices something anyway children who have learned to read a room for danger rarely stop noticing, even once the danger changes shape. But he doesn't ask, and she doesn't offer. Junwoo watches her across the table with the particular attention of a man who built an empire on reading exactly what people are trying not to show him. He says nothing over breakfast. But later that day, without telling her, he makes a quiet call to Jinkayu, asking for something he hasn't asked for in weeks. A name. Any name, connected to unusual movement near the estate's perimeter or anywhere Heather has been seen alone in the city. He doesn't know yet what's coming, but something in his instincts, honed over 15 years of staying alive in a world built on exactly this kind of quiet, deliberate pressure, tells him the calm his household has found is about to be tested by someone patient enough to have been circling it for weeks already, and that whoever it is has already gotten close enough to know things about Heather that even he doesn't know yet. The call comes at 2 a.m., the building superintendent, panicked, telling her in broken sentences that her floor is on fire and the whole block has been evacuated. Heather doesn't remember the drive across the city. She remembers arriving to find flashing lights painting the street red and blue, firefighters still hosing down a building with smoke pouring from a single window she recognizes as her own. By morning, what's left of her studio is ash and water damage, and the smell of something that used to be a life. The fire marshal's report will later note accelerant, deliberate points of origin, nothing accidental about how fast it spread. But Heather doesn't need a report to know. She already understands, standing on the sidewalk in yesterday's clothes, that this wasn't bad luck. Everything is gone. The notebook where she once kept her sister's childhood letters, the 2 photographs that survived the move from home, the small collection of proof that her old life existed at all before Soul swallowed it. 10 years of careful discipline, of Fridays and envelopes and penance, reduced to something firefighters are still spraying down with hoses. She doesn't cry in front of the crowd gathered to watch. She spent too many years learning not to give anyone that particular satisfaction. Jinkayu arrives before Jinwoo does, dispatched the moment the call reached the estate, and drives her back himself without asking a single question she isn't ready to answer. She sits in the passenger seat with soot still on her hands and says nothing for the entire ride, staring at a city that no longer feels like it belongs to her at all. Jinwoo is waiting when they arrive. Not in the entryway, not with words of comfort ready. He's already 3 floors below the main house, in a room few members of staff have ever been allowed to see, standing over a table laid out with more weapons than Heather has ever witnessed outside a screen. She finds him there because Jinkayu's face tells her exactly where to look. Guns, a blade she doesn't recognize the purpose of. Jinwoo's jacket already off, sleeves rolled, the particular stillness of a man who has made peace with an ugly decision and is simply waiting for the logistics to catch up to his resolve. "Who did this?" he says without turning around, voice flat in a way that frightens her more than shouting would have. "I don't know." "I do." He checks the chamber of something metal with the ease of a man who's done this 1,000 times before, hands steady in a way hers haven't been since the phone rang at 2 a.m. Hanyol has been circling this house for weeks. "I should have ended this the moment I suspected. Instead, I waited, because I let myself believe peace was possible for once, and now you've lost everything you own because of my mistake." "Jinwoo, I'm not asking you to understand this." He picks up his jacket. "I'm asking you to stay inside these walls where you're safe while I finish it." He had a gun in his hand and an empire at his back, but she was the only one standing in his way when he turned toward the door and found her already there, arms crossed, refusing to move. "No," she says. "Move." "I said no." Her voice doesn't shake, not with the same fear that's been sitting in her chest since the phone call, but with something harder underneath it. "You walk out that door with a weapon in your hand, and whatever this is, whatever we've built with Minho these past weeks, whatever peace has come into that boy's life since I got here, you lose it forever. He'll know exactly what you went out to do tonight. Children always know. And no amount of love you try to give him afterward will erase what he understood the moment you chose this. If he steps through that door with a weapon, he loses his son forever. What will he choose? The man he's spent 15 years becoming, or the father he's only just started learning how to be? "You don't understand what he took from me," Jinwoo says, and for the first time his voice cracks with something raw enough that the room feels smaller around it. "He's already taken my wife, my peace. Now I am not standing in this house doing nothing while he burns down everyone He stops himself before the sentence finishes, but they both hear the shape of the word he didn't say. Her past went up in flames 3 hours ago, but the fire in her eyes was what stopped him from leaving, standing between him and that door with nothing but her own refusal to move. I lost everything tonight, she says, quieter now, letting him see exactly how much it costs her to stay standing upright. Every photograph, every letter, 10 years of proof that I had a life before this city. I understand loss, Jinwoo, better than you think I do. And I'm telling you, becoming him doesn't bring any of it back. It just makes you exactly what he wants you to become. Jinwoo stands frozen between the table full of weapons and the woman refusing to let him reach the door, breathing hard, every instinct built over 15 years screaming at him to finish what's been started the way he's always finished things. Then tell me what to do instead, he finally says, and it isn't a challenge. It's something closer to surrender. Because I don't know how to fight a war without becoming the thing I'm fighting. You have resources he doesn't, Heather says. Money, reach, people who owe you favors that have nothing to do with guns. Use what makes you different from him instead of proving you're the same. Jinwoo doesn't answer right away. He looks at the table, at the weapon still in his hand, and for a long moment nothing in the room moves at all, not him, not her, not even the air between them. This is the ultimate moment of truth. Will Jinwoo revert to the cold-blooded killer his enemies want, or will he choose the slower, harder path of a true father? Subscribe right now to make sure you don't miss the epic conclusion. Upstairs, unheard by either of them, Minho stands at the top of the basement stairs in his pajamas, having woken to raised voices in a house that's been quiet for weeks. He doesn't understand every word drifting up from below, but he understands enough, his father's voice, sharper than it's been in a long time, and Heather's, steady even now, holding a line neither of them can see him watching from the dark. Jinwoo sets the weapon down. It isn't a dramatic gesture. No clatter, no theater in it, just a quiet placement on the table among the others, the sound of a decision being made rather than announced. Heather doesn't move from the doorway, watching him carefully, aware that this moment could still tip either direction. Tell me what you need, he says. The notebook, she answers. The one from the study. If someone inside your own organization sold information about your wife's schedule once, that same person likely has ties to Hanyol now too. That's how he's known your movements. How he found me. It's not a rival operating from outside your walls, Jinwoo. It's someone who's been inside them the whole time. Something shifts across Jinwoo's face. The particular horror of a man realizing a betrayal he spent 4 years mourning as an accident might still be actively unfolding under his own roof. He retrieves the notebook that night, and this time he doesn't lock Heather out of the room while he reads it. Together, page by page, they cross-reference names his wife had circled in the margins against a roster of staff who have maintained access to the estate's schedules for years. One name appears in both places, a logistics coordinator trusted with routes and timing for over a decade. Someone who has poured tea in this house more times than either of them could count. Not Jin Kyu, whose loyalty has been proven 100 times over in ways Jinwoo has simply never had reason to doubt again after tonight. Someone lower on the household's radar, easier to overlook precisely because he'd made himself so unremarkable. He's the one who's been feeding Hanyol everything, Jinwoo says, staring at the page like it might rearrange itself into something less devastating. For years. Then we don't kill him, Heather says. We use him. What follows over the next 3 days is nothing like the retaliation Jinwoo had been preparing for in that basement. No blades, no bodies. Instead, quiet phone calls to contacts he's cultivated in legitimate business circles, a prosecutor who owes him a debt from years back, a detective willing to build a case if the evidence is solid enough to survive a courtroom instead of just a back alley. Heather helps him organize the notebook's entries into a timeline any outsider could follow, translating context Jinwoo takes for granted into something a stranger with a badge could actually use. Jin Kyu, once he learns the truth about the man who spent a decade in this house feeding information to his late mistress's killers, offers something Jinwoo didn't expect, a confession of his own, admitting he'd suspected the coordinator years ago and said nothing, afraid of what proving it might unravel. "I should have told you," Jing Kaiyu says, unable to meet Jinwoo's eyes. "I let my loyalty to this house become an excuse for my silence." Jinwoo doesn't forgive him easily, but he doesn't send him away either, a mercy neither of them expected 4 years ago, back when mercy wasn't a word that belonged anywhere near this family. The sting is set for a Thursday night, timed around a routine shipment exchange the coordinator has been quietly feeding to Hanyol's people for months. Jinwoo insists on being present, not with a weapon this time, but as a witness. The man whose testimony, combined with the notebook, will finally give the prosecutor everything needed to end this cleanly. The most dangerous man in Seoul didn't use a gun to win his biggest war. He used the truth, assembled patiently over 3 sleepless nights, more devastating to Hanyol's operation than any bullet could have been. Heather stays behind at the estate that night, not because Jinwoo asked her to, but because someone needs to be with Minho, who has picked up on enough tension in the house over the past few days to know something important is happening even without being told the details. They sit together at the nursery window, overlooking the front drive, the same driveway where all of this began weeks earlier, waiting for headlights that don't come for hours. When they finally do, it's not a single car but 3, moving in the careful formation of people who know exactly what they're doing. Heather watches Minho's whole body go rigid beside her, small hands pressed flat against the glass. The handcuffs on Hanyol were put there by the law, but the trap was built by a father who chose, for the first time in 15 years, to protect his family with something other than fear. The lead car stops at the base of the steps, and Jinwoo steps out alone, unhurried, no blood on his hands, no bodies left behind him in an alley somewhere. He looks up toward the nursery window before he even reaches the front doors, as if he already knew exactly where to find his son waiting. He came back to the house without blood on his hands, and the door was wide open for him, no locks, no distance, nothing standing between him and the family he almost sacrificed everything to protect the wrong way. Minho doesn't wait for Heather's permission this time. He's off the window seat and down the hallway before she can even call after him, small feet slapping against marble that has heard nothing but silence for years, until he reaches the top of the staircase just as his father clears the final step. Jinwoo catches him without hesitation, lifting him the way he hasn't in longer than either of them could accurately count, and for a moment neither says anything at all. Minho's face is buried against his father's shoulder, and Jinwoo's eyes, when Heather finally reaches them from the hallway behind, are wet in a way she's never once seen from him. Not on the driveway, not in the study, not even standing over a table full of weapons 3 nights ago. "It's done," he says, meeting her gaze over his son's shoulder. "All of it clean, legal, nobody died tonight." Heather feels something in her own chest finally loosen, a tension she didn't fully register carrying until it started to lift. Downstairs, word is already spreading through the household staff that the shadow hanging over this family for weeks has finally broken. But upstairs, in the quiet after everything, what matters isn't the arrest or the case now being built against Hanyol in a courtroom that will take its time. What matters is a 9-year-old boy, arms wrapped around his father's neck, refusing to let go, and a man who, for the first time since Heather arrived at this estate, looks like he finally understands what he almost lost trying to protect it the wrong way. 3 weeks after Hanyol's arrest, Jinwoo calls a meeting no one in his organization saw coming. 15 years of loyal lieutenants gather in a room built for war planning, expecting instructions on how to absorb the territory Hanyol left behind. What they get instead is Jinwoo standing at the head of the table, calmer than any of them have ever seen him in that room, announcing that he's stepping back from every operation not already fully legitimate. The docks, the logistics companies, the businesses that can survive daylight and paperwork, those stay, restructured, transferred to men he trusts to run them without him. Everything else he's dissolving, piece by piece, over the coming months. Some of the older men in that room look at each other like he's speaking a language they don't recognize. A few understand immediately, having watched the change in him from a distance for weeks now. Jing Kaiyu, standing at his usual place near the door, doesn't look surprised at all. He gave up a throne to stand on a riverbank with her, though on that particular afternoon in the boardroom, none of the men watching him yet understand exactly what he's trading it for. The riverbank comes 2 weeks later, on a Sunday evening when the Han River catches the last orange light of the day, the same unhurried way it has for centuries, indifferent to whatever business gets settled along its banks. Heather doesn't know why Jinwoo asked her to bring Minho here instead of sending a driver the way he usually would. She doesn't know why he insisted on walking instead of using the car waiting a discreet distance away, or why Minho keeps glancing between the two adults with the barely contained excitement of a child who's been let in on a secret he's determined not to spoil. They stop at a bend in the river where the water slows and widens, city lights just beginning to flicker on across the skyline behind them. Minho runs ahead toward the water's edge, and for the first time since Heather has known him, he's not wearing a formal suit at all, just simple clothes, sleeves he can actually roll up, shoes he doesn't have to worry about scuffing. Minho's suit was gone, replaced by the messy grass stains of a happy child chasing something along the riverbank that isn't fear for once, just the ordinary joy of being 9 years old with nowhere he has to be. Jinwoo watches his son for a moment before turning to Heather, and something in his expression makes her go still. "I've spent most of my life building things I thought would keep the people I love safe," he says. "An empire, walls, rules that turned my own son into someone too afraid to speak in his own house. None of it worked the way I told myself it would. The only thing that's actually made this family safer is you, standing in a driveway with nothing but a rubber glove and the refusal to look away." "Jinwoo, let me finish." His voice carries none of the command she remembers from their first weeks together, none of the practiced control, just nerves, plain and unguarded. "I'm not asking you to stay as staff. I never should have let myself think of you that way to begin with. I'm asking you to stay because Minho is happier with you in this house than I've seen him in 4 years, and because I don't know how to be the man I'm trying to become without you standing beside me while I do it." He reaches into his jacket and produces something small, not the kind of jewelry she'd expect from a man who once ran 3 districts of this city. No ostentatious display, just a simple ring, understated in a way that tells her he chose it thinking about her rather than about what people might expect him to give. "I'm not asking you to marry into an empire," he says. "There isn't one left to offer you. I'm asking you to build a family with me. Both of us, earning it honestly this time, one ordinary day after another." Heather looks past him for a moment, toward Minho crouched at the water's edge, laughing at something only he can see in the current, sound carrying easily across the quiet evening air, a sound she remembers being told he hadn't made in years before she arrived. She thinks of every Friday she spent sending money across an ocean as penance for a debt she never quite believed she could finish paying. She thinks of a driveway, a yellow glove, a decision her feet made before her mind finished catching up to it. "Yes," she says, before he can second-guess the offer or she can second-guess her own answer. "Yes, on one condition." A ghost of his old wariness flickers across his face, old habits taking a moment longer to unlearn than new ones take to form. "Terms again." "Terms again," she agrees, allowing herself a small smile. "No locked doors in this family. Not for you, not for me, not for him. Whatever we're carrying, we carry it together from now on, out loud, where the people who love us can actually help." "Agreed," he says, and this time when he says it, there's no bodyguard nearby to look horrified at the concession. Just the river and the fading light and a boy still laughing at the water's edge. They built a family from the ruins of 2 different worlds, hers carved out of guilt and distance, his out of grief and fear, and this time, built on truth instead of silence, it was built to last. Months later, the Seongbukdong estate looks different in ways that have nothing to do with the architecture. The East Wing study, once sealed and untouched, has its windows open most afternoons now, sunlight finally allowed back into a room that spent 4 years holding on to grief no one was brave enough to release. Minho runs its hallways in regular clothes more often than not, drawings taped to walls that used to hold nothing but silence, his voice, still quiet, still careful, but present now, filling rooms that used to amplify only fear. Jinwoo spends his mornings at a legitimate logistics office instead of the docks, home for dinner most nights. Present at a kitchen table, he once only watched from 2 floors above through a security monitor. Heather still keeps a ledger, old habits proving harder to fully release than either of them expected. But it's a different kind of ledger now, one that isn't about debts owed or penance paid, just an ordinary family's ordinary life, tracked because she still finds comfort in knowing exactly what she has. If this story touched your heart today, drop a heel in the comments below. Like this video if you believe that love is something you must earn through truth and actions, and subscribe to this channel. We will see you in the very next story.